Yeah, pretty simple. We advertise our positions at our website. So if you were to go to the website and look under the Human Resources Department, you will see Apply Online. And then there's an online application process. And that also can be found in EdJoin and other areas where we advertise for posting of vacancies.
So the beginning process as it states today, and we are looking at some systems to maybe change up our hiring process. But for right now, it's still candidates go through EdJoin, go in and search open positions. I think that a lot of people do in the educational world. Go on, the candidates need to have created a profile for themselves in EdJoin. And from there, it's simply submitting their application on EdJoin for open positions. Knowing that those positions will run for about 10 days usually in an average posting. We've recently run into a period of time of mass hiring. Some of our positions after the school year started, they will post and be open until filled because we're in a time crunch. And the school year started, there's a sub in there, and we're looking to get a contract teacher. So some days they're really short postings. Usually they're 10 days though. That's the average setup.
Okay. So one thing to remember about San Diego Unified School District, it is the second largest school district in California. So LA Unified is bigger than us by about 3 times, but we employ 6,000 teachers. So that's something to kind of take note of and when you're navigating the hiring process, because it can be frustrating because our system is such a massive, massive system. So the easiest direct way to do it is you go to the San Diego Unified School District website, you scroll down a little bit, and you'll see a phrase that says, I would like to, and one of the options is apply for a job. And it's right now, currently, it's a yellow circle. You click on it, and it takes you to all the job postings that are currently open. And so at that point, since you're using like an online job application, you have to actually create an account with a username and a password, set up, manually input all your information. You're like, this is on my resume. Well, yes, it is, but you have to create it in the system. And then after you've established your account, you can like input your resume from like LinkedIn if you have it, or you can, create and upload documents to attach to the application. So you may be applying for multiple jobs, and so that's why we need that account set up first and foremost. So it's super important that you're accurate with your information and that you complete it entirely, because if you miss just one field or go, oh, I don't have any, then it will be considered incomplete and it'll get kicked out. And then you'll be like, they never called me. So just be very careful about being accurate to make sure all the fields and all the information has been filled in and is accurate information.
You would go to the website under HR. We have links that you can click on, and there are a variety of different job titles that are there. You'll see the aides, you'll see classified, basically the classified positions, and then certificated positions. And if you are a teacher, you are looking for certificated positions. Within certificated, you have the instructional positions, and then also administrative positions.
So we do a paper screening, and so it's always important that, and I encourage candidates to treat the application like a term paper. Look for capitalization, look for typos, look for things that if we see them, we're going to question if this person really put their best foot forward into that application. And also the complete application. So all documents that are requested are included in the application process.
The first thing we look at, you have to know that we're a high school district. So I suppose that maybe unified districts with elementary might be a little bit different. But for a high school district where we have single subjects and very specific content area positions, our first cut point is we're really primarily looking for individuals who are subject matter experts first. That's really important to us. So if we're hiring a math teacher, while you might have an accounting degree and have some strong math skills, I'd really like to prefer to see a math major if I can. That helps kind of move you towards the top. Sometimes we look at the universities they're coming from, and if I've got a math major from UCLA, I'm going to make some assumptions that person's probably pretty smart and they've got a math degree from UCLA. That doesn't hurt their chances, quite honestly. So that's kind of the first cut point is being a math major in terms of that application process. From there, a strong application with letters of recommendations from administrators or people that have actually watched them student teach in most cases when we have people that are new to the profession. Those are good letters. Sometimes we see letters that are from friends or family, and which is fine, or even another teacher, which is okay. But it's better to have people that evaluate teachers and know what they're looking for from an evaluative perspective that are writing those letters as opposed to a more casual letter.
So completing the process accurately is actually one of the first steps. Like I know I just said it, but you would be surprised. Also, a second thing is if you're applying as a regular teacher, not as a substitute. If you're applying as a substitute or a special education position, you do not have to have a video. But if you're applying for a regular teaching position, you have to have about a 5-minute video of you actually teaching and your instruction to submit as part of the application process. So that immediately, automatically starts to filter people out of being even offered an interview. So that's an important snippet and clip to have and to provide. And I know everybody's videoing because you're doing your TPAs, so be very aware of what clip will best highlight what the institution or the district you're applying for, what their values and mission statements are. So yeah, that's an important one. For us, for San Diego Unified, it would be, meeting the needs of all students, right? So you aren't just saying things or putting things on a resume. There's an artifact attached to it to show what your beliefs, your values, and your skill set are.
So during the interview process, the things that really jump out at me when I'm doing the interview include evidence of professionalism, making sure that they are willing to learn. A candidate doesn't need to know everything. They need to be willing to learn whatever is needed in order to provide support to students. And that's really the most important thing, is a desire to work with students and a love for teaching and wanting to help the next generation.
Resumes are important, but they don't always seal the deal. But they are good for catching our attention. Personally, one of my advice would be if you have a resume that has more than one page, make sure your information is at the top or at the bottom of each of those pages. So if they get sorted and mixed up, it's easy to find that applicant's page. Also, don't be too wordy. Just kind of get to the point. Give us the information. I would say if it's more than 3 pages, most of our folks that are reviewing those application resumes are not going to get past page 2. So keep it short, concise, and all the important information that really tells us about the candidate.
Unfortunately, sometimes it's almost the opposite effect, and sometimes we're actually weeding people out to get to where we want to have a final group of 5 to 7, 8 candidates we want to actually interview. So we'll go through. If we see spelling mistakes on a resume, that's the deadliest thing you can do, or grammatical errors. If we ask you for 3 letters of recommendation and you have 1, or if we ask you for 3 references and you have 2, that tells us that you can't follow very simplest of directions of trying to get a job, in a career job. So those are things that kind of whittle down the list right off the bat. And they might be phenomenal teachers, but so far we're seeing that you can't even follow the directions that we gave to you very specifically of what we're looking for. So I think those are the common mistakes that kind of whittle things down and rise other people to the top. Then we're looking for that math major. We're looking for, are you bilingual? We're looking to see, sometimes where you even did your student teaching. If you did student teaching, if we're looking to hire a teacher at El Cajon Valley High School, a full Title I school with huge diversity, and you did your student teaching at a school that's similar, and you have great letters from the principal or the department chair or your university advisor, that's a pretty good candidate for us, because it says that you have worked in that environment already and had success there. We want to take a look at you. Oh, by the way, if you're bilingual, all the better. All the better. So that's kind of how we get there from a couple different platforms.
Simple, clear resumes. Like when you are going through like hundreds and hundreds of resumes, you have to be able to skim and scan. And so there's this trend recently that's like really tiny font, like I have to squeeze everything in, and there's no white space. And that tends to be one that if I feel bad going on record, but I'm going to keep it real. It's exhausting to read and try and interpret it as a reader. So consider your reader and that they're reading tons and tons of resumes. And so those I tend to like, kind of like, well, I'll get to that one. And so the ones that are easiest to read, honestly, are the ones that get my attention first to sort through. I think also I wrote down, so it needs to not be tiny. It has to have kind of white space so that the information pops off the page. One of the other things, I'm looking at my notes because I was like, this is an important thing because this is your first kind of like impression. So we talk about first impressions in an interview. Your resume is your first impression, right? Between the font you use and how you organize it and what you choose to put on it. So putting on very clearly what you have done and the impact of that achievement. I think sometimes people stop at, for example, I can say I taught, my example, my student teaching, I taught 1st and 6th grade, all content areas in self-contained classrooms. Everybody has that. So for me to be able to say, I taught 1st grade in La Mesa and I became... I daily did small group reading instruction and kids moved 2 levels because of my, try and get, maybe not that specific, but try and get something in there that's super specific that helps you stand out from other candidates. So for my teaching experience, I taught at a high Title I school and we exited program improvement. That when I went to apply as a principal, I absolutely put that on my resume because that's a skill set and I had systems and structures and ways to move kids in their student achievement in tangible ways. Mm-hmm. So I think in a resume you can, without getting too, just figure out not just what I did, but the degree of achievement. A second thing is customize your resume for every position. Mm-hmm. This I don't think is done enough. So if you're applying to a magnet school, or if you're applying to an international baccalaureate school, right, or you have experiences that would help you with those schools, you would want to customize it. So Crown Point is a music magnet. I personally had background in music. I did music in college, in choir, and play an instrument. And so I highlighted that a little bit in my intro letter and in my resume for that specific school. So, and references. References are super important. And I can tell you, as somebody that just had people I was listed as references, if I haven't talked to you in 3 years, you probably want to give your reference a head up. Let them know, hey, I'm putting you down as a reference. And here are 2 things that this job, that I think I'd be good at this job that might be helpful as talking points. Always, it depends on your reference, but I always and I will ask, I'll say, what are 2 things, what are 2 of your skill sets? You have amazing, what is it, the 2 things that you want me to really speak to help me organize my talking points too?
Resumes have been really interesting in the last few years because there's been a change. They've definitely evolved into something kind of different. You'll see some that are more digital, that you can really see all the different components of it online. If you're talking more about a kind of your traditional resume, I think metrics, things that, I've seen percentages of how far someone is with a particular skill. You see that a lot with computer programmers. I know JavaScript, I know Python, and within education, I see that with, I understand PBIS, I understand MTSS, and kind of your journey as far as learning on the resume. Those are really interesting when a resume can show kind of where you are, a snapshot of your skills and knowledge at this time. And then, of course, you always want to update your resume with all of the experience that you've had up until that point. So updating a resume, at least on an annual basis, is probably a good idea. I think you should have both an online presence. That's very important for a portfolio. So, having a digital HyperDoc type of resume, I think, is extremely helpful. Maybe it has links to videos of you teaching in the classroom. Maybe it has a link to your LinkedIn account or your Twitter account. But you also want to have that PDF version that can be printed as well. Even if there are hyperlinks on it, you want something that a person who maybe isn't, who's looking for a candidate but maybe isn't the most technical person, something they can print out and look at, and they can also see everything that you have to offer a school.
So our interview process basically is once we select the candidates, for our district, there are certain schools that are given priority to the interviews, and so, for example, used to be our lead schools, which is typically our Title I schools, will be those schools that get to do the interviews first, because they're dealing with probably the most needy clientele as far as students. And then principals interview. They rank the candidates by their interview and their paper screening, and then from there they make recommendations to HR for the hiring and placement of those candidates.
Yeah, so a normal interview process in our school. So in the Grosse Mountain Union High School District, we allow our principals to do primarily the screening. The exception to that is in special ed, where our special ed director and assistant directors also do screening for special ed teachers that are at school campuses. But our principals are the primary screeners, and they're the ones that choose who they want to interview. Of course, from the HR perspective, if we know we have some really good candidates in there, we've met them through the sub pool or whatever, or even student teaching placements. I know a lot of our student teachers as well. We'll give them advice. Hey, you really want to take a look at this person. But ultimately, the principals are the ones that choose who they're going to interview and screen. So that's really important to know. The principals sit on every single interview that I know of in our district for teachers. It's the most important hire that we have in our schools is hiring teachers. And so they'll screen. The principal secretary usually is the one that's going to call the candidate, set them up for an interview. So one bit of advice I have for candidates that are applying for jobs is, if you put down numbers and you're interviewing for jobs, you need to be paying attention to your voicemail. And by the way, make sure your voicemail is empty. There's nothing more frustrating than calling a candidate that's applying for a job and we can't even leave a voicemail because it's full. Come on. So, and then if you get a call back immediately to say that you want to accept the interview, because we're on very short time frames here. And we don't have a lot of time to be making 5 phone calls and trying harder than you to set yourself up for an interview. So that's got to be important if you're in that phase. So when you get the call, you're going to get set up for an interview. And from there, it's show up for your interview at least 15 minutes, if not 30 minutes early for your interview. Sometimes we get ahead and we'll move forward ahead if we can. But always be early, because being early will also eliminate there was bad traffic, I got lost, Google gave me wrong directions, all that kind of stuff, which is all fine. We just don't care, because we just need you there early and the very latest on time. And because we had a teacher, a really good candidate, they were tied, and that was the thing, but they were 4 minutes late for the interview. That 4 minutes late cost that person a job. So even though they had a great interview, but are you going to show up for work every day? Is there going to be a classroom full of kids waiting for you because you have an excuse? Be on time. When you come in, you're likely going to be for a teacher interview. You will see usually minimum of 3, but usually 5 to 7 people on the panel. It's usually somewhere in there, because you're going to have a principal. You usually have a VP that's in charge of that department on the interview panel. You're going to have a department chair, and maybe even a couple other members of that department will all be on that interview panel. I would suppose some districts might even have somebody from the district office maybe on an interview panel, but not for us, not as much. It's usually the school site does all that. But that'll be what your interview panel will look like. And in the past, there used to be going around and handshaking. That's not a thing anymore. Because of COVID and just the other things, handshaking is not going to pretty much be a part of the interview process moving forward, I don't believe.
So at a very basic, everybody that interviews has to navigate a Zoom. So get a Zoom account if you don't have one, and set it up. And so that will be the interview experience is via Zoom, and we don't see it going back to in person. Just so you know, I checked with HR anytime in the future. I think this will now become our constant vehicle for interviewing, and there are things about interviewing via Zoom that you may not understand. First of all, it's hard to make connections via Zoom, so make sure you are not, you want to make sure that you are set up physically so that your background isn't distracting, so that if you have animals or pets or children, that they're not coming in to interrupt. Phones, smartwatches, like notifications, anything that will throw you off, just put them outside for the time that you're going to be interviewing. Like, don't have them on your body or near you, because that's something that stands out when you're like checking your phone and then you're like, where was I? Oh, like that. Just, you want to eliminate that kind of stuff. Noisy jewelry, because the microphone might pick up on noisy jewelry. Those are some of the things. And also practicing looking in, like I'm so tempted to like look in the eyes of the people. And on Zoom, if you're looking at people, you aren't necessarily making eye contact with the camera. Mm-hmm. So practice speaking and answering into the camera and like smiling. Like, people get nervous, but just relax, breathe, remember to breathe. I think that's an important piece too. So that's the first part. You're going to be interviewing via Zoom with somebody from Human Resources, because you get interviewed and you get a job offer of employment from the district, not the individual schools. Mm-hmm. This is very different than other districts I found out. So the job offer comes from Human Resources. They will typically tell you what school you are. They might appoint you to a school and say, this is the job offers at the school, or depending on the time of year, they might just hire you into a pool of teachers, at which point your name gets put on a list and sent out to site principals. Mm-hmm. So there's two different ways. So one is you interview with us and we end up placing you at a school site because of the time of year. Or the second is we hire you, you go on a list, and principals then contact you and can interview you, usually via phone. So be prepared for a phone interview. If you know the name of the site, do your research. I cannot emphasize, know the site. Know the site. And dress matters. I just want to put that out there. Like, if it's Zoom, but dress does matter. You want to dress as if you were coming in person. Yes. And for us, even if you're interviewing as a substitute versus a regular teacher, this is your interview that goes on record with the district for employment. So just be aware that it counts. It matters, and it will be, kind of captured and put on. You will have a file as soon as you interview with us. You might want to practice and record yourself, mm-hmm. so that you get an idea of the tics and the things you do that may be not serving you well, and the things that you do well that you want to do more of. Mm.
So the interview process for our district when it comes to a teacher is typically there will be a group of principals, at least 3 principals most of the time, that conduct a round of interviews. And lately that's been via Zoom. After that first interview, if the teacher is just unanimously with all the principals someone that they want to hire, offer wouldn't be given right at that moment, but it could be given a couple of days later once HR is notified. There are also some instances where it could be, you know what, maybe they just didn't have a good interview. Maybe it'd be a good idea to do a second round just to make sure. And that happens oftentimes too. It might not be the same group of principals that would conduct the second round of interviews, but it would be another group of principals that take another look at the candidate.
Do your homework. My recommendation, and I did this myself going through the ranks, I practiced. I got in the mirror, I put on my tie, I put on my jacket, and I went through the questions. I even went as far as recording myself, because I realized I've come to terms, I'm a fast talker. So I want to have pace. I want to hear myself and be comfortable with my own voice before I get ready to step into the interview room. And then try to just, as best as you can, relax and have a conversation. I think that our district does a really good job of trying to get to the person during the interview, and rather than just being the right answer, is there a connection?
So most of our hires, the exception is if we have a pool of positions, Last year we had 35 special ed positions, mild, moderate, mod, severe. So we had pools because we're doing mass hiring. That's the exception. Let's just make the assumption that it's for a school site. So you've got a math interview at Monte Vista High School. So a couple things first. Your letter of introduction should be geared towards Monte Vista High School. And it should be updated. It should be a recent date. A letter of introduction or letters of recommendations that are more than 6 months old are, in our world, useless. It means it's too old. It also means you didn't make an effort to personalize it for the school that you're interviewing for. So write it to Monte Vista High School. So that's going to get your foot in the door for an interview if you do those things. So that's first. But let's now assume that you've got the interview and now you're preparing to come in. You should absolutely go onto the school's website, get to know the school. If there are WASP reports updated there, go through the chapter 1. It tells about the school and the demographics, and you want to know that. If you can go on their website, you can also usually tell what are their priorities. You can see it through the ASB pages. You can see it through, sometimes the principal have a whole message of what their goals and their vision is, right? So you want to get to know a little bit about the school and be able to speak confidently to the school specifically. The other thing, I'll tell you what you don't want to do is every school has deficiencies. We all do. We're all working to get better all the time. You don't want to point out what the school's deficiencies are. They know what their deficiencies are. They don't need a candidate telling them what they're doing wrong. So point out the positives, because remember, the people sitting in that panel, that's their livelihood. And that school is very close and personal to them. And so if you say bad things or negative things about their school, that's not going to play well for you. So you really want to highlight the positives, what you're impressed about by the school, whatever that might be. The other piece is, and this is one of the tidbits of advice that I think is really important. Always dress very professionally, like this is the most important job of your life. And so whatever that is for you, dress as professional as you can dress. You're not going to wear a suit to school every day. I would wear a suit to a teacher interview. It's appropriate. The other thing that I highly recommend, if you can pull it off, is wear the school colors. So if you're applying for West Hills, you're perfectly dressed for West Hills right now because you've got a royal blue. That's your school colors. And if it's a tie, when it comes down to it between the top two candidates, and one person's wearing black and gold for an El Capitan interview, and somebody's not, you're going to get the job. Because the way they look at it, you have to put yourself in the mindset of the people that are interviewing you. You're saying to them in the interview without saying the word is that I can see myself being a vaquero. And not only can I see that, I'm wearing black and gold to prove it to you that I can see myself being at this school because I really want this job. It's not a statement you even make. Trust me, they notice that you're wearing their school colors. And in high schools, probably more so than elementary middles, we're very proud of our school colors and our mascots and all that culture of our campus. So that's a really important thing to do if you can do that.
I would encourage you to follow whatever district you're applying for on social media. That's, I think, the quickest, easiest way to get to know any system. I've heard that our Twitter is really good. I only use Twitter for work, so that's where I tend to kind of go to. But I think they also have, I don't know if they have Instagram. Yes, they do. They do, because our superintendent was like, I need to do better with Instagram. And I have heard from newly hired teachers that was where they got really good information about our system. Going to the website and going to About, like, you can find out a ton of information about who we are, who our students are, what our beliefs and values are as a system, and whether or not that aligns and matches you. So that's something to consider. Like, I know everybody's like, I want a job and I'm ready. Put me in, coach. I did my credential. I'm ready to go. Just know that you do have options and choices right now, and to really try and find the system that best serves you, that's going to give you an alignment with your personal beliefs and values of who you are as an educator, so that you can get longevity in this career. Because if you just get a job to get a job, and you get frustrated by the system, or you get frustrated by whatever beliefs and values are in place, then that doesn't serve you well. And so I think that's something we forget. I think we get so like, I need a job, that just realize there are options out there right now. We are at a time in education where you are desperately needed. So thank you for choosing to come into education. We need good teachers more than ever.
Yeah, it's definitely important to dress appropriately. and professionally. That doesn't mean you need to spend a lot of money on clothes. It just means, make sure you are dressed in an appropriate way in order to conduct an interview either in person or via Zoom. Also, I think it's really important to sell yourself. A lot of times, people want to, maybe it's uncomfortable talking about yourself, the skills you've developed, and the things you've accomplished. But really, that is the time to share those things. And if you don't do it, no one else will. So it's very important to sell yourself during the interview. The last thing would be, typically at the end of an interview, they'll ask you if you have any questions. And from what I've seen, it's important to ask questions at the end. It shows that you're interested in the position. It shows that you've thought about that school district or that school, wherever it is you might be applying. And I know that the people who are conducting interviews afterwards will say to each other once the candidate leaves either the room or Zoom, like, that was a really good question, that was very insightful. It shows how much you're thinking about the job.
Comfortable but professional. It's not a conversation amongst your buddies, but it's a conversation amongst potential colleagues where, again, you're trying to form a relationship, but it should definitely be professional and respectful.
That's a tough question because you have so many different panels, so it kind of depends on the school and the culture, and so they're all going to be a little bit different. But I think in any interview panel, you want to speak professionally. You want to attempt to monitor your ums and your ohs and your ahs, because those are very distracting to a panel when they're listening to that. So my advice to candidates, having done this a lot, practice. Have somebody do a mock interview for you, and have them, and be open to taking some really strong criticism about those things. Because a lot of times they get nervous, and it's really slowing down your answers. Because the ums and the ahs, really, we do that because we're trying to buy time to think of the answer. We all know that. Unfortunately, it comes out distracting on the other end. So that's one thing. You want to be confident in your speech. You want to be smile, be personable. You want to try to read the room. You're making eye contact with everybody. So, and you want to make sure that you make eye contact with each person in the room. If you are able, in most interviews, there is usually a name and the associated position on the name card on the desk. Wherever possible, and most of them will probably do introductions. If a question is specific to a teacher, you really want to try to address the teacher or the department chair in that question. If it's more classroom management, you may want to then more look at the VP, because that's who you're going to be dealing with. So if you're able to read the room and the question, and you can tailor the question to the person that's going to be most interested in it, remember, you're speaking to the person and you're trying to convince them that you understand this question is related to you, my fellow teaching person, about curriculum, because I'm going to be working with you and helping write curriculum or right. So you want to try to tailor it as much to that. Smile, be personable. If you have humor that's appropriate, that's a good thing, because remember, you're going to be working with these people. And in almost all of our schools, we work in PLCs, so we're working with others. And that's a huge thing that you have to be able to, those people need to know you're going to be a good part of our team, and you're going to be a contributing member of our team. So I think those are the key pieces of what you really want to focus on in the actual interview.
That one is, I think, a bit tricky, because I feel like you can err on either side of extremes, right? You can make it too formal and come across as very stiff and not relatable. Or you can come across as too casual and like, oh, we're buddies, we're pals. Like, oh yeah. I had somebody swear in an interview, and I was a little bit like, okay, I get an idea of who you are. However, I get an idea of who you are, right? So yes, I would say you want to walk a line of being personable and friendly, and at the same time ensure that you are being professional, that you are being trusted with other people's children. Can we just say that? Like, are you a person that we would want you spending copious times with other people's children? And is that how you're presenting yourself? I think that's something to remember. I think one of the things you said is the top two things of what I'm looking for when I'm interviewing a candidate, and I also checked with kind of our human resource officers in preparing for this. Answer the question. It's such a basic reminder. There is a very specific reason why you're being asked that question. So this is not your application. This is not your interview. Think of it more as, this is our interview, and we are looking for specific information. So there are reasons why we are asking the exact questions we're asking. So so make sure you answer the question. The other piece is that to be aware of is to be able to talk succinctly about your instructional practices, right? So what are your instructional skills, and how are you meeting the needs for all students? Those are the two main things that we look for. And not just saying, oh, I meet the need of all my students. Like, no. Go back to, what is that example? What is the, what is the accomplishment of your achievement? Even if you were student teaching, you achieved something with students. You moved students in some way, and you know how you did it. And if you're sitting here watching this thinking, I don't know how I did it, then this is your opportunity to stop and reflect, talk to a friend, talk to somebody who has passed an interview recently, and find out, what, you have to do, put your work in, I think, to present your best foot forward. So those are, with examples. You need examples, because I can't tell you how many, it's like they come in an interview and I'm like, wow, they're saying all the right stuff, but they're just saying it. I have no concrete example of something in their work that backs up what they're saying.
Well, I think that it's important for a candidate to be comfortable. You don't want to be super nervous. You want to be confident. And just because, when they're interviewing you, they want you to be confident in the classroom and be able to have a presence in the classroom and a presence when talking with parents. So you want that to be the thing that comes out. You don't need to look, super quiet. You don't need to, kind of like, be super humble in the interview. What's important, though, is to show that you're able to command a classroom.
Top one is, we want candidates who have a heart for kids. The other things we can kind of teach you for the most part, and we're going to support you, but we can't teach you how to love kids. We can't teach you how to care for kids. Another thing we're looking for is folks who are have been successful through the not just their education, but going through the credential process and program, and who are up to date on what is the trends on teaching, the trends on data, and those that I got this from a former superintendent, Dr. Kevin Silverberg, who says, lean in. If you're willing to lean in, when you're receiving corrective criticism, we can work with you. And so we want people that heart for kids first and are ready to lean in and dig into what it takes to be an effective teacher.
Once again, going to be dependent on what the position for, what the subject matter is. If you ask a math teacher what's the most important thing, they're going to say that you are like a curriculum expert and you know how to do math better than anybody else. The high school principal is the person that's going to be making the decision of who they're going to hire. I think that's important for the candidate to know. You need to impress the principal. Because ultimately, the teachers can have input, but the principal makes a final decision when it comes down to it. So you'd better impress the principal. So having said that, having known that, that's a tough question, because there's a number of things that we really care about. And you can actually find it on most district websites, what the district's priorities are in terms of things they're looking for. But in most public education sectors, and this is my personal view, I want to find somebody that is equity driven. It's really important, because if you're equity driven, then that tells me that I'm going to have a better chance that you're going to do everything humanly possible as a teacher to ensure that every student in that class gets what they need. And that's really important for us. It's also really important, you're asked for two, I might give you more than two. We really believe that you need to be culturally proficient. Because our students are very diverse, and you need to understand the importance of appreciating that, having an important social justice lends to you and being restorative in how you deal with student discipline. Those are huge things. And what the greatest thing that if I was talking to young teachers, they're at an advantage. And it's not to say that an older teacher that's new to the profession is at a disadvantage, but the kids coming up today, and I say kids because I'm old, but the young teachers coming out today, they're growing up very culturally proficient. They're growing up with a restorative mindset and a growth mindset. They're growing up with a social justice perspective coming into the world. Those are all things that, curriculum aside, they're going to give us our best shot to not kick kids out of class. They're going to give us our best shot to make sure that all kids have an opportunity to pass classes in many different ways. But those are things that are really important, and they're most important to the principal, because we're the ones dealing with the teachers and the kids when those things are not happening. So those are the things I think they really need to hit on in their letter of recommendations, in their resume, and certainly in their interview.
In my experience, they struggle with either answering too briefly because they're not quite sure what the answer is, or they answer too long. They take too long on the first two questions, and they've given way too much information, and they're, and then the next two questions, then they only have because these are timed. So be aware, they're very quick interviews, 20-minute interviews, I feel like. So I think what candidates struggle to do is understand the balance of taking 2 to 3 minutes to answer a question and not being too brief, but also, I had 6 questions in an interview. Somebody was done in 5 minutes. I was like, thank you for your time. Like, thank you for considering this job. We'll get back to you. You didn't give me enough things to fill out my rubric on. So, and then I get somebody that repeats themselves 3 times. They're talking in a circle. And so I think that's more so, it's not necessarily a specific question. I think it's in the pacing and then knowing yourself and your teaching practice well enough to be able to speak succinctly, I think is what people struggle with.
I would say the top 2 things I'm looking for are the ability to learn skills that a candidate might not already have. Because, like I've said it before, a candidate doesn't need to know everything in order to start teaching, but they need to have the willingness to learn anything to be a great teacher. And then the second thing would be a love for students, because the students, that is what we're created to do as a school. It's to serve the students and the families of the students. And so if a willingness to learn, a growth mindset are there, and a love for the students in the community, you're going to be a dynamite teacher.
One of my favorite questions, and this one always gets interesting responses, and it appears to be one that you would think would not be that difficult, but people struggle with it. And it's simple. You have a student in your class who is angry at you and upset at you. How would you basically handle that situation? And too many times candidates get stuck with rules and procedures and school rules and my way or the highway. And the first thing they forget to ask is, why? What did I do? What did I say? Why do you feel that way? And to me, when someone instinctively has that instinct to say why, that kind of separates them right there. Another one is based on very similar, and it's about working with parents. A parent calls you, they're very upset, and they left a message, and they want you to call them right away because you did something little DJ. And the first thing the teacher wants to do is, talk about the rules and the procedures rather than saying, what happened? How can I help you? And listen. And then in listening, usually 9 times out of 10, there's some kind of miscommunication, or there's really probably one big thing that student left out in their story. And then it's just a matter of, can you work with them? Are you willing to negotiate with the parents to get on the same side of, we're here together for the best interest of your child? Those are, to me, next level folks who really get it.
There's a common question that a lot of interviews include, and it is very specific. Explain what are your greatest strengths and weaknesses, and give us an example of each. Mm-hmm. People struggle with that. They don't struggle as much with strengths. oh, I'm really good at this. They don't struggle too much with strengths. The weakness part, it's like you've just asked them a question in Latin. They just look at you like I don't want to say what I'm weak at, but we do. But they need to expect to get asked that question. I promise if you go through 3 interviews, somebody's going to ask that question. And you need to be able to say, here's what I need to work on. Because it's weak, we all have weaknesses. And it's really more getting to your emotional intelligence of asking you a question of, are you aware enough of yourself that you know what you need to work on, and then you know that I need to do something about this, and then I'm going to take some steps to try to improve on it. That's really what we're asking in that question. We don't say it like that, but that's really what we want to find out. Is can you look at yourself and be given some advice or suggestions or criticism, and then do something about it? That's what we're getting to with that question.
In my experience, they struggle with either answering too briefly because they're not quite sure what the answer is, or they answer too long. They take too long on the first 2 questions, and they've given way too much information, and and then the next 2 questions, then they only have because these are timed. So be aware, they're very quick interviews, 20-minute interviews, I feel like. So I think what candidates struggle to do is understand the balance of taking 2 to 3 minutes to answer a question and not being too brief, but also, I had 6 questions in an interview. Somebody was done in 5 minutes. I was like, thank you for your time. Thank you for considering this job. We'll get back to you. You didn't give me enough things to fill out my rubric on. So, and then I get somebody that repeats themselves 3 times. They're talking in a circle. So I think that's more so, it's not necessarily a specific question. I think it's in the pacing and the knowing yourself and your teaching practice well enough to be able to speak succinctly, I think is what people struggle with.
Well, it depends. There are various things that different people struggle with during an interview. If it's a young candidate, it's experience. It's not having that experience. I know that's what I struggled with when I first began. And then as you continue in your career, when you haven't been a principal yet, you don't have that experience. So those are the things that you struggle with when you're first starting in a job, is just lack of experience. Sometimes people are very nervous during an interview. And that's a good thing to know about yourself, because if that's the case, you're not going to be able to sell yourself. And you might not be able to say all of the great things that you have to offer a school. So that's another thing to be aware of. I think the most important thing for a candidate is to know what weaknesses that person might have, and then just work on that before the interview. And that's different for every person.
Well, you can't discount life experience, especially folks that have gone through potentially trials and tribulations and work with various cultures and different folks in the community. There's not a day that goes by in my work now that I'm usually not making a decision reflecting on a past experience. So definitely life experience is important. Teaching experience. We're in a position now where it's so competitive to hire teachers that we've done things with salaries to where we give placement on the salary scale based on their teaching experience. So we take great, we think that that's very important that they bring that experience with them. So I think it's how they fit together where you look at weighing the difference between the two, but they're both very important.
I really want that teacher that is going to come to me, even if they don't have a ton of life experience and a ton of teaching experience. If they have all those other qualities I mentioned, restorative, I'll take a brand new 22-year-old every day of the week, because they believe in kids. We've had people that are, mid-career changes, and that's fine, but they've got a lot of very strong thoughts about student discipline and taking responsibility and turning work in on time or get a 0, and they've grown up in that world. Well, that world's gone in our world of public education. We need to, because kids nowadays are coming from a very different perspective. So I hate to say it, but I really want somebody that's going to be open-minded and have all those other different qualities that I talked about, over age, over experience, over I've been teaching for 20 years. Quite honestly, if you've been teaching for social science for 25 years, probably not an advantage. Yeah, probably not an advantage. Because the 24-year-old, I'm going to be able to get them to do exactly what we do, how we do it. They're going to infuse technology much more rapidly without pushback. They're going to take PD and implement it. The 25-year-old veteran teacher that knows they've done this forever, they don't care what the rest of the team's doing because they've got their own curriculum. It's going to be a struggle to get them to do what we want to do as a school.
Making sure that you are standing out as an individual and what you individually bring to this work is important. So if your life experience ties in directly with who you are and who you show up to be for students every day, absolutely. And it can be that one thing that sets you apart from other candidates. So, is one heavier than the other? I don't think necessarily. We're looking for the disposition to work with students, to work with other adults and collaborate around some really difficult work in changing our system and systemic structures for kids. And we want allies that will be a part of that work. So if that's work you've done in the past, you would want to include that. Once again, though, you want to be able to speak succinctly. So if you only talk about things that you did in your first career and not about your teaching practice, you have to circle back around and connect it, right? So if these are the things I did in my past life, and this is how I implement it and how it impacts students and why it's a benefit to students, you want to make that connection, I think, strong. Who you are is what you bring. So if at the core you hate working with kids, this is not the profession for you, and you should find that out now. Instead of, part of the work I do is supporting teachers that are ineffective teachers. That's not, life is too short to be stuck in something that you don't love to do. So.
Life experience definitely affects everything, in our lives. Those are the things that mold us and shape us into who we are today. So I think that is really important. I think our life experiences are the things in our lives that point us in the direction of going into education. So I think that does affect to a certain extent. And I believe the other part of that interview was experience, or that question was experience, teaching experience.
Mm-hmm.
So as far as teaching experience is concerned, that is going to also affect your interview in a large way, because as you develop skills, you'll be able to talk about that and articulate what you do in a classroom. Sometimes you're going to be providing direct instruction. Maybe you haven't received a lot of direct instruction training. Other times, maybe you're going to be checking for understanding. Another thing, too, is working with a team. I mean, that is super important as well. And looking at data and analyzing data. That's something that you kind of need experience to really know how to talk about it if you've never done it before. So I'd say both life experience and teaching experience are important. It's just that you always have life experience. The teaching experience comes later when you've had some time under your belt.
In what ways does a candidate make a good first impression?
I would say their professionalism, how they carry themselves, as far as when we're talking and during the interview process, and I don't know. That's an interesting question because it's done in different ways. It comes across in their conversation. It comes across in their appearance. I know you don't judge a book by its cover, but if a person walks in, a gentleman, he's got a tie, suit on, he's commanding respect, not demanding it. Same with the lady, if she comes in and is well put together, and that tells us that they're taking the interview serious, and it's the way that they communicate. And it's a difference between, I guess it's okay to be nervous. We get that. But once the interview starts and you kind of your comfort zone, then that's when we can get to seeing if they're a good fit for us.
Kind of like what I said before. You come in wearing school colors, you're friendly, you're personable, you speak with intelligence, confidence, you're articulate in your answers. Well, that's a great first impression. You're making the eye contact. You're doing all of those things. You've got a sense of humor about you. That's the best first impression I think that a good young candidate can do. And by the way, they're early for the interview.
I think this one's tricky too because it's talking too much is not a good first impression, if that makes sense. I think if you're talking super duper fast, and you're too fast, and or if you're super nervous, and then you say, "Oh, I'm sorry, I'm really nervous," that's not a good first impression because now I think you're going to be nervous in front of kids. Mm-hmm. So, remembering this advice was given to me. It's like before you start the interview, remember to breathe. I know everybody's about breathing, but it's like it's so true. Like sit and breathe and think, "I am lovable. I am comfortable and I've got this." And like repeat it to yourself. Go stand in the mirror in the bathroom and repeat it to yourself and breathe and get your brain in that space. I think that sets you up to have a good first impression. I've gone through an interview where you know sometimes people come across as too intense, and as somebody who is intense, I'm aware of that. I'm aware of softening my face. Your non-verbals and your tone of voice communicate a lot for first impressions.
Some ways that a candidate can make a first good impression include the way that they are dressed. That's the first thing you see as soon as you know someone walks in the room or you're on Zoom. If you're on Zoom, it's important to have a distraction-free environment in which you are, in which the interview is being conducted. I would say try to have something in the background that isn't distracting to people who are asking the questions. You definitely don't want people walking by in the background, and try to make sure that the environment is quiet. If you have children, make sure you know they are being watched, or there's something going on where they're busy. And then you know right off the bat, if someone is confident and they're talking about the things that they're good at, and focusing on those things, that's really important. Even if you're nervous. I mean, being nervous is okay. That's definitely okay, but you want to make sure that you fight through that nervousness so that you can at least share what you are good at. It's when you aren't able to do that, that even if could be really good at the job and you're a really nice person, the interviewer is going to be like, oh, I don't know if they have what it takes to be a teacher.
Those are the ones that come in and they already have a good grasp on how to use data to make a difference in instruction. Those are ones that understand the importance of making and building relationships with students. Those are the ones that come in and want to get to know students before they start teaching students or are putting up rules and different things like that. It's like get to know them first, make that connection, and then once you get to that point, it's such a different story that you can tell as far as how the instruction part goes.
The candidates that we see that really are most successful early on, and you know, they're brand new teacher and come and take a look at them early. They're very open to receiving what the school is trying to do, and they don't question, you know, what the priorities in the mission and vision statement are of the school. They're implementing those things with fidelity quickly. They work well on a team. They're eager to learn, and they don't pretend that they know everything. And they really are part of that whole learning process. And we go back to the growth mindset, right? That's huge. That's huge, because then if you have a growth mindset about your job, then you also probably have a growth mindset about kids. And those are things that we think are really valuable and going to give you the best chance for success. Because the people that don't on the opposite side, those are the people that we non-re-elect, because they're very difficult to work with. And it doesn't bode well for us if they become permanent.
If you can talk succinctly and you can communicate your passion about this work, it tends to translate. That's, I mean, to keep it just very simple, I've been very long-winded on other things, but what is it that you bring to this work that's uniquely you?
I think, well, there's a few different things. The one thing that I haven't really talked about a lot, but I just mentioned, was collaborating as a team. It is very important now, more so than ever, that candidates are able to work with teams. So what you need to be able to do is build trust within the team. You need to be able to build those relationships. have empathy for others, especially when people have a different opinion than you, because that happens in grade level teams quite frequently. And so you have to work through that in order to do the hard work of commonly formatively assessing students, analyzing that data, and then creating next steps. Because if you don't get through the trust and the building the team, then that's not going to happen. So it's important to be able to build relationships with people and trust. Also, if you don't know every single skill and you don't know everything going into the interview, that's okay. It's showing a willingness to go to professional development sessions, to do reading on the side, to watch videos or read blog posts that provide information about best practices for math and for reading and so on. If someone's able to adapt during a meeting, like let's say their audio is not working on Zoom and they're able to problem solve and get another device, that shows that they want the job, but also they have the ability to problem solve in the moment in kind of a high stress situation and figure it out. You're going to find that all the time in education where technology is not working, or you're on a roll and then an announcement happens and it kind of throws the whole class off, and now you got to bring them all back together. There are so many things that are out of our control in life in general, but also in the classroom. And so you have to adapt all the time. Maybe you have a team member that's out and now you're going to be getting their students for the day, when we're not in a COVID world anymore, or something like that. You're going to have to make adjustments on the fly all the time.
So what?
We used to call it the I. All right. And it's not for Popeye. It's more or less when the person comes in and all they talk about is themselves. I like this. I want that. I do this. And you don't hear them talking about the connections about kids or student learning, or if it is an I, the reward that I feel when students are learning. So not about yourself, but about the students.
Yeah. Mentioned earlier, if you come in, two things come to mind. If you bring up things about the school that are negative, that the school is not doing well, even if it's correct, you might be right. They know it, by the way. They know they need to work on those things. They don't need somebody else coming in and telling them. Okay, so that upsets a panel. The other thing that is a death sentence to an interview, either in the application process, and I just saw one this past week. It was unbelievable. I don't know if this person was just trying not to get the job, but every position they had for 3 positions in a row, they wrote a paragraph about how problematic the school and the administration was, and that was the reason for them leaving and moving on to somewhere else, is because either the school, the district, or the administration was non-responsive, didn't listen, unorganized, whatever. And each one of them, it's like a paragraph long. So if you're in your interview, you're answering questions and you're talking about your previous experience of not getting along with other staff members or the administration, thank you is all I can say as part of being in the interview panel. Thank you for showing your cards, because you've just spared us from being number 4 in your list. So
I will say a red flag is when somebody says, no, I don't really have any questions. Like, seriously? You don't have one question for me? Like not even like, when will I hear about the results of the interview? Like, that's one that's inappropriate to ask. Like, is there a timeline or a time frame I could be expecting to know how I did? You could ask that. Don't ask about how much you're getting paid. You can look that up. It's in the teaching contract with the union. You can look that up through the San Diego Education Association. It has the pay rate and pay scale in there, so don't ask that. One that I think is always that is to ask an actual genuine question that you want to know. So for example, what are the top 2 things that you're looking for in a candidate, right? Or what are the things that stand out most for candidates that go on to have great success? You can also, make it be a genuine question that you want an answer to. I think that's what it comes down to. And if it's something that isn't just like operational, like, then find that question. When I interviewed to be a site principal, it was a panel with site, teachers and parents on it, and I just said, if you wouldn't mind, could one teacher and one parent tell me, what are you looking for in your principal candidate? That's what I asked, and I got good feedback on that question. So I think what matters most is that it's an authentic inquiry that's coming from you that you genuinely want to know. Yeah, and know yourself. Look up on Google. There's frequently asked questions for any job position, and look up on Google and start, spending some time practicing it, or working, find a buddy who will do a mock interview with you.
I would say a candidate that is either dismissive of questions, doesn't fully answer the question, seems distracted, and if all those things happen at the very end, they don't have any questions about the position, or really don't know much information about the district or the school for which they're applying. Those are all red flags, especially if they talk a lot about working with teams in the past and it wasn't going well, like they've had a lot of conflict with team members in the past. It could be a red flag for not being able to work well as a team in the future. So those are the things that I'm kind of looking for in order to make sure someone would be a good candidate for our students.
Well, I would hope they would ask what are next steps. That's okay to ask that. Sometimes there are questions regarding curriculum that they may ask to kind of know what we're doing as a district, and then it's not a bad question to ask. Is there anything else that I could do moving forward to help me be a good candidate? That's okay.
If you haven't already covered it in the interview, I think it's okay to ask the panel. So, what is it that you're looking for? What is your perfect candidate? What is your perfect math teacher, English teacher? What does that look like? And who would that be? And see what their approach is, because that's going to tell you what their priorities are. And you might even be able to, based on their response, you might even be able to add something in before the closing of it that might address that issue that maybe you didn't think about sharing before. But now you go, oh, and by the way, I also had this experience, of coaching or doing whatever, and I forgot to add that to you, to my responses before. So you might cover something that you didn't get to cover before.
Not answering the question, and trying to throw the entire kitchen sink into a question of all the things they've done that don't relate to the question. So one thing to know is that at the end of all of our interviews, we ask 2 questions. So there's the specific content and job-specific questions. There's always 2 we ask. One is there anything else about you that you would like for us to know? That's where you, if you're like, oh, I didn't talk about this, and I'm tempted to talk about this, but it's not the question. Don't do it. Wait until we ask you, is there anything else you would like for us to know about you? And then the second, this is kind of off topic, the second question is, do you have any questions for us? So we always end every interview with those 2 questions. Doesn't matter what your role, doesn't matter what position. So a red flag would be, talking too much or talking in circles. It's something where you're like, well, they didn't really answer the question. They seem like a really great person. They didn't answer the question. So you should spend 2 to 3 minutes on each question. And then another red flag is when things are too generic or general, when you keep it very broad, or you saying things or swearing, right? Like there are certain red flags that are like, right? I think one thing to do is to share in-depth experiences to support your response. So to avoid that red flag, it's like you give your Sunday school answer. We always talk about that, right? Mm-hmm. Your Sunday school answer. But then connecting in-depth experience that supports that without being too long-winded. It's hard. It's definitely a skill set you need to practice. So like I said, human resource officers are the people who hire and offer job employment. We have 9 of them, I think 9 of them. And they are divvied into areas, and they do help each other out. So we're, with such a big district, we're split into 6 areas, we call them. And so area 6 is all the high schools. All the high schools are going to be, interviewed by the HRO that's in charge of area 6. And we then have different, if their area is fairly well staffed, other HROs will come over and help interview and help do job offers. We do have where candidates will go to a school site and start talking to principals, and principals get excited. They're like, I really want this person, but they don't have any vacancies. And so HR is the one that has the vacancies and can hire you. And then at that point, you're on the list, you're in the pool. Then you can start considering, different school sites and what will work for you. And just know also, get your foot in the door. If San Diego Unified is where you want to be, just realize that, staffing is done by seniority, and you're going to get your foot in the door. You're going to get somewhere, and then you can, every year, we do something called Post and Bid in May, and that's all the vacancies. And as a employee, you have rights to apply to different positions and change school sites if you discover that the site just isn't a good match for you. We have over 200 schools, so there are a lot of options for you.
I know in opening up Highgate, I've done 150 interviews just for this one school, at least, for teachers and for aides and academic coaches and just everyone. And so the ones the candidates that asked the questions at the very end were the ones that kind of stood out afterwards. And there were a lot of great questions like, what is your purpose statement? What is the focus for the school year? What can I do to better be prepared to take on this position? Even if there's if during the interview it comes up that what your focus is going to be as a school, if they ask about specific books or resources they can go to, or ways that they can build their own knowledge capacity and different things that come up during the interview, those are the things where it's like, oh, okay, they were paying attention, they're interested, and they're willing to learn more. And a person who's doing the interview is going to really pick up on that.
Okay, so very important that everyone should know is that not I don't hire, the principals don't hire, the board hires. So all that processing going through the application, through the interview process, the recommendations that are made by the principals based on the ranking of the interviews comes through my office. And then with my office, in conjunction with executive cabinet and extended cabinet, we make recommendations for assignments based on good fits and even the principal's recommendations. Ultimately, all those candidates are listed on our consent agenda, which goes to the board, and the board approves the hiring. It could be as quick as a 2-week turnaround, as long as we get it in front of the board or on the board consent agenda within that window. But typically, from the time a person interviews, from the time that and one step also forgot in that process is that once they're recommended and they are, it gets to my office, myself and my director of human resources, Melissa Brown, we will contact them for a conditional offer. So there's a formal offer that we've been doing so many on Zoom, but we either bring them in or get on Zoom, show them what they're going to be estimated. That's very important with making, because we have to review their transcripts, review their degree. That's where they're placed on the salary schedule. They sign that, then it goes to the board for the consent agenda. But that is an important piece on that part. 3 weeks, 2 weeks, somewhere, depends on that. And then from there, after the board approves, then they're brought in to start the onboarding process.
They could write an email to the members of the panel thanking them for their time and the opportunity to interview, regardless of whether I'm selected. I really appreciate the interview opportunity. You obviously have a great school. And I would love to be a part of your team if I am selected. And if I'm not, thank you again for the opportunity to interview. And it's just simple, short, but you're just kind of showing them one way or the other. I just really appreciate this opportunity, and I appreciate it. Gratitude goes a long ways. So I think that's something they could do. The other thing that I think is really important is if you've got an interview, make sure that your references you have listed and the numbers you have and the contact information you have for your references, make sure that those people know you could be called. I'm interviewing. I don't know if I'll get selected or not, but if I'm a finalist or I'm the one chosen, you'll likely get a call or an email asking for a reference check. So just if you see a strange number come up, could you please check on it and respond to it, in a in a short amount of time because it could be a reference. We won't hire somebody we can't do references on. And the references won't call us back. It could be the difference between you being selected and not. And oftentimes, it's amazing that people put down references, that won't say anything nice about them, which is amazing. Put down references that are going to say nice things about you. You have the choice and control of that, by the way. Make sure the number is accurate. And make sure that those people know that you're going to be calling. And that's sometimes difficult, especially over the summer, because some of the people that might be references might be a teacher or somebody at a school. Well, they're on summer break. So you kind of need to take that in consideration when you're applying for jobs. You might need to update your references with somebody that might be more available. So just keep an eye on that. So I'd say just be at the ready and to respond quickly. And I think I've mentioned this before, and make sure your voicemail is empty. Because if it's nothing worse than trying to call a candidate to offer them a position and you can't get through to them, or they don't call you back. Because if it takes 2 days for us to get back to you and you've applied for a job and you've interviewed and you won't respond back to us, we might go on to number 2. So just be prepared for all that.
Great point. Okay, do you have any other tips or suggestions you'd like to give to prospective teachers?
I think we're at a point in time. I don't think there's anything wrong at this point because we're in COVID, right? And hopefully we're on the downward trend of that. And so, but I would say for the next year, if you're applying for jobs, and it's a personal, private matter, I'm speaking to you from a principal's perspective and an HR perspective. If you are vaccinated, I'd share that information. And the reason I say that is it's the difference between if you are a close contact and you're in a classroom, if you are vaccinated, you get to stay. And if you are not, that's a personal choice you have, and that's great. But if you're a close contact, then you're getting shut down for 8 to 10 days. And now I got to sub for 8 to 10 days because find your personal choice. But remember, you're competing against other people. And that could be something that might be that thing that they say, okay, I don't have to worry about that because I've got other stuff to worry about. That's just my own personal. Other people might not appreciate that. But there's going to be a point in time where we're all going to have to be vaccinated. And might as well put your cards out on the table ahead of time, at least during this particular period of time, which is odd, but because it's a strange time we're living in. The other piece I don't think I've touched a lot on. Our younger teachers are coming out much more technologically advanced than our older teachers, and I would share that. That you've got great proficiency in applying, presenting, using different platforms that really engage kids, and talk about those things because you'll probably have a technology question in there. Be prepared for a technology question. Be prepared for an equity question. Be prepared for that greatest strengths and weaknesses. You need to have a elevator speech at the top. Your first questions always tell us a little bit about why you'd be a great English teacher at Mount Miguel High School. Make sure that's 2 to 3 minutes. Make sure you're prepared for that. Don't make it 5 or 10 because you'll have generally 10 to 12 questions on the interview and you'll have 30 minutes to do it. So if you're taking 10 minutes to do your elevator speech, you now have 1 minute for each of the other questions. So just kind of need to pace yourself on that. And your final question is almost always, is there anything else that you'd like to add that we haven't shared before? Or, do you have any questions for the panel? That's almost the last question that you will always see. So right there, you got 5 of the 10 questions that are pretty common. If you're in a math interview, prepare to do math problems. You will be asked to do math problems in an interview in our district. And that might even be 8 to 10 problems before you come in for your interview. They want to see how you work through them because they also want to see how you're going to teach kids. When I was principal of Monte Vista and you had a math interview, you go to my whiteboard, there's going to be a problem on the board, and they're going to have you, or 2 problems, and they're going to have you teach the panel how you're going to teach that concept right in front of them. They want to see how you're going to teach it right there in front of them in the interview. So just know that those kind of things you can expect from some of those types of interviews. And you'll probably asked about classroom management, what's your approach to student discipline and so those are all pretty common questions that you can expect to to ask in most teacher interviews.
Talking too much is not a good first impression, if that makes sense. I think if you're talking super duper fast, and you're too fast, and you do, or if you're super nervous, and then you say, "Oh, I'm sorry, I'm really nervous," that's not a good first impression, because now I think you're going to be nervous in front of kids. Mm-hmm. So remembering, this advice was given to me. It's like, before you start the interview, remember to breathe. I know everybody's about breathing, but it's like, it's so true. Like, sit and breathe and think, I am lovable, I am comfortable, and I've got this. And like, repeat it to yourself. Go stand in the mirror in the bathroom and repeat it to yourself and breathe and get your brain in that space. I think that sets you up to have a good first impression. I've gone through an interview where you know, sometimes people come across as too intense, and as somebody who is intense, I'm aware of that. I'm aware of softening my face. Your nonverbals and your tone of voice communicate a lot for first impressions. So if people are introducing themselves and smiling at you, you saying, "Hi, thank you so much. Thank you for your time, Rochelle. I'm excited about interviewing," right? Like, just those little rituals I think are important, more so on Zoom than ever.
They're given an offer, and that could happen either from a principal who did the interview, or it could be from HR. It kind of depends. Once that happens, HR will continue reaching out with whatever else might be needed. After that, you'll have either the principal or maybe the academic coach or someone else at the school site who will start reaching out for the next school year about things to be prepared for, dates that you need to know, things like that. The district office will also provide that information too. Usually there'll be dates given for when you can work in your classroom and when you can begin preparing for that. And districts typically have some time at the beginning of the school year where they'll have like some informative sessions that new hires would go to. And then there's also induction, and you would begin the induction process right away. So that could be a function of HR. For our school district, it's a function of instructional services. So they would reach out as well. So there's a lot of different teams, especially in big school districts, that kind of have a part in bringing new hires on.
I would say if they haven't heard from us in 2 weeks, if they haven't either got a sorry letter or got a phone call in a couple of weeks, it's okay to email the secretary to say, any word, next steps. Typically, though, we will tell them in the interview process at the end what the next steps are and if they are to be considered for like another pool. Because what we found ourselves doing probably in the last couple of years, because of the need, is hiring various rounds of interviews. So, you may interview with 3 principals and not selected. Doesn't mean that you're not going to be a candidate. It may require you to go through 2, maybe 3 rounds of interviews to find that right fit. And what I would tell candidates in this day and age, don't give up. We usually start recruiting in March. Okay, that's when we usually start. And we continue, and sometimes I think we interviewed yesterday. I'm serious. I mean, it's like you never know when positions are going to come up. This is a time for folks to, if they have the desire, if they have the heart, they have the passion, now is a time to be in classroom teaching. There are a lot of great opportunities out there.
They could write an email to the members of the panel thanking them for their time and the opportunity to interview, regardless of whether I'm selected. I really appreciate the interview opportunity. You obviously have a great school, and I would love to be a part of your team if I am selected. And if I'm not, thank you again for the opportunity to interview. And it's just simple, short, but you're just kind of showing them one way or the other. I just really appreciate this opportunity, and I appreciate it. Gratitude goes a long ways. So I think that's something they could do. The other thing that I think is really important is if you've got an interview, make sure that your references you have listed and the numbers you have and the contact information you have for your references, make sure that those people know you could be called. I'm interviewing. I don't know if I'll get selected or not, but if I'm a finalist or I'm the one chosen, you'll likely get a call or an email asking for a reference check. So just if you see a strange number come up, could you please check on it and respond to it, in a short amount of time, because it could be a reference. We won't hire somebody we can't do references on. and the references won't call us back, it can be the difference between you being selected and not. And oftentimes, it's amazing that people put down references, that won't say anything nice about them, which is amazing. Put down references that are going to say nice things about you. You have the choice and control of that, by the way. Make sure the number is accurate, and make sure that those people know that you're going to be calling. And that's sometimes difficult, especially with the summer, because some of the people that might be references might be a teacher or somebody at a school. Well, they're on summer break, so you kind of need to take that in consideration when you're applying for jobs. You might need to update your references with somebody that might be more available. So just keep an eye on that. So I'd say just be at the ready, and to respond quickly. And I think I've mentioned this before, and make sure your voicemail is empty. Because if it's nothing worse than trying to call a candidate to offer them a position and you can't get through to them, or they don't call you back. Because if it takes 2 days for us to get back to you and you've applied for a job and you've interviewed and you won't respond back to us, we might go on to number 2.
I mean, rule of thumb is to like send a thank you. That's kind of rule of thumb. So making sure you know who the people are that interviewed you. I don't think that that's a must anymore, honestly. It is just a kind of a nice thing to do. And I would say if you haven't heard back, to then also have that name and that email, so that you can just send an email and say, hey, I interviewed a week ago. Is there any information? Because once again, that is a frustration that potential candidates have said to us, is they feel like they get lost in the system. That isn't done on purpose. It is simply, I think, a sheer number of applications and interviews that we're going through and trying to make sure that we're tracking, and getting back to all of you. So have patience, but also know that it's okay to be a very polite, professional squeaky wheel, right? And if that frustrates you, this is a profession. We've talked about this, haven't we? This is a hoop jumping profession. So, you just finished your credential, but then you're going to come to me and you're going to have to get your tier 2 induction credential. You're going to have to jump through all those hoops when you just finished a credential program. So welcome to California and being in education. So it's a big system.
600 teachers, and there's 9 HROs, so it will take some time.
And their assistants that help them. So, right. And then you have credential analysts that are waiting for credentials, and then you have to get your fingerprints done, right? So once you're offered a job, there's this whole other set. You're going to get all these papers that are electronically that you have to fill out. And so, you won't show up at a site like the next day. There is a process that continues. The interview is kind of the first step, actually, after the application. Then they're going to check your references. They're going to do some follow-up, and it can take a little bit of time for that to happen.
Well, I think you should be receiving regular emails, but it's always a good idea to reach out to the principal if you have the principal's email address, or the contact in HR, just to make sure that nothing's being forgotten. It shows that you are excited and that you want to make sure that you're staying on top of everything that needs to be done. So I think that is definitely appropriate to reach out. It could be once a week or once every other week if you're not hearing regularly from HR or your principal.
Apply at Panama Buena Vista.
So, but I would say for the next year, if you're applying for jobs, and it's a personal, private matter, but I'm speaking to you from a principal's perspective and an HR perspective. If you are vaccinated, I'd share that information. And the reason I say that is it's the difference between if you are a close contact and you're in a classroom, if you are vaccinated, you get to stay. And if you are not, that's a personal choice you have, and that's great. But if you're a close contact, then you're getting shut down for 8 to 10 days. And now I got to sub for 8 to 10 days because find your personal choice. But remember, you're competing against other people. And that could be something that might be that thing that they say, okay, I don't have to worry about that. Because I've got other stuff to worry about. That's just my own personal. Other people might not appreciate that. But there's going to be a point in time where we're all going to have to be vaccinated. And might as well put your cards out on the table ahead of time, at least during this particular period of time. Our younger teachers are coming out much more technologically advanced than our older teachers. And I would share that. that you've got great proficiency in applying, presenting, using different platforms that really engage kids, and talk about those things. Because you'll probably have a technology question in there. Be prepared for a technology question. Be prepared for an equity question. Be prepared for that greatest strengths and weaknesses. You need to have a elevator speech at the top. Your first questions always tell us a little bit about why you'd be a great English teacher at Mount Miguel High School. Make sure that's 2 to 3 minutes. Make sure you're prepared for that. Don't make it 5 or 10, because you'll have generally 10 to 12 questions on the interview, and you'll have 30 minutes to do it. So if you're taking 10 minutes to do your elevator speech, you now have 1 minute for each of the other questions. So just kind of need to pace yourself on that. And your final question is almost always, is there anything else that you'd like to add that we haven't shared before? Or, do you have any questions for the panel? That's almost the last question that you will always see. So right there, you got 5 of the 10 questions that are pretty common. If you're in a math interview, prepare to do math problems. You will be asked to do math problems in an interview in our district. And that might even be 8 to 10 problems before you come in for your interview. They want to see how you work through them, because they also want to see how you're going to teach kids. When I was principal of Monte Vista and you had a math interview, you go to my whiteboard, there's going to be a problem on the board, and they're going to have you, or 2 problems, and they're going to have you teach the panel how you're going to teach that concept right in front of them. They want to see how you're going to teach it right there in front of them in the interview. So just know that those kind of things you can expect from some of those types of interviews. And you'll probably be asked about classroom management, what's your approach to student discipline, and so those are all pretty common questions that you can expect to be asked in most teacher interviews.
But just gratitude goes far. So I'm grateful for all of you that are going to watch this and that you have chosen to seek this profession. It's my 22nd year in this. I started as an elementary teacher in City Heights, and left college, went into the classroom, and was like, I am not ready for this. So at the same time, having a foundation of going to Point Loma and having a faith-based to ground me in this work, I think made me the teacher I am. And I can say honestly that, I'm nationally board certified now. I've moved into administration. I'm now at central office. Like, the opportunities to impact a greater number of students are available for you too. And just to be patient with yourself, to have confidence, and that, we live by faith, not by sight. So if you are tapping into your faith, know that the path and the position that is right for you will be coming. Good luck, and just that this is probably, we always talk about that your first year teaching, you never have another year like your first year. And now, I was just at a school site this morning, it was like, this is worse than our first year, isn't it? Yeah, it's worse than our first year. And I don't say that to discourage you. I say that because now more than ever, our students need you. Our students don't just need a warm body. They don't just need somebody. They need highly exceptional teachers, because I do strongly believe in the promise of public education, and our babies right now are not where they need to be, and it's not their fault. It's not their fault. So, so once again, thank you just for picking this career, and that it is a challenging one. It's a rewarding one, and just I'm glad every day I picked it.
I was talking to someone who's here right now in our district. I think some of the things just to be aware of are definitely professionalism. That's something that's very important. Making sure that, like I said before, the way that you dress, that's appropriate, starting right off the bat at a school site or for a district. It's also important to make sure that you're positive, willing to learn, and like I said before, really wanting to be part of a team, and able to build a team with your coworkers, because that is going to be that teacher collective efficacy, the ability for a team to know that they can create positive change in their students' lives. That's the highest effect size according to John Hattie. And so if you don't have that willingness to work as a team, and you don't communicate that, during an interview or really to your school, then that's going to make it very hard for students to really get all of the learning that's possible. Yes, I think it's important to know about the district. That would inform you when you're asking questions at the very end of the interview. And also it would inform the candidate to know, especially if they get multiple offers from different districts, they'll be able to know right away which district they want to go with. Which it's better to do that, all of that research before the interview than after you get the offers, because then that can be very stressful. So make sure you know which schools, which schools you want to work at, what part of town. Maybe it's going to be hard if you live on one side of town to drive all the way to the other side. Maybe you want to be 10 minutes from your school or 5 minutes, and that'll give you more time to get to work and to get home. So those are all things you want to take into consideration when you're starting your profession.